super special podcast. I have with me today Michael from Wakelet, and we also have some really special guests with us, Chey and Pav. We are so excited to hear from them. You're going to hear what they're doing with students, what they're doing with podcasting. You're going to hear about some really exciting projects that they are working on. So let's get started.
Absolutely.
Michael, I'm going to give you the microphone and you get to ask the first question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really excited to be doing this session with you all today. I think this is a topic of conversation that hasn't been explored too much, certainly from our side at Wakelet, but maybe in EdTech generally. So I think the best question to start with is, how did it all start for you guys? When did you start podcasting, and how did you have the idea to bring podcasting into the classroom?
Thank you so much, Michael, for that question. Actually, podcasting for us started with the students. It wasn't necessarily something that we thought would make a great addition to the students. It was almost as if, our podcast was started because of our students. So we did get started in about May of 2019, so just prior to the pandemic beginning. And we were involved, a friend of mine who had a podcast that had nothing to do with education. It was a real estate podcast. He and I grew up together, and he knew that I was teaching in the same school or in the same community where we went to school ourselves. And he wanted to do something to give back to the community. And I suggested, how about helping us teach students about podcasting? Like, you have a great podcast. We don't really know anything about it. But we're sure that this would tie in really well with Chey and his class. Were doing Genius Hour at the time. And we thought that this would make a great culminating task for Genius Hour. And so we brought this idea of what is podcasting to the students. So we all sort of learned about what podcasting is and how to make a podcast. And Jazz, who was my friend, had a studio and had like graphic designers and all kinds of great people that were helping with creating their podcast. So they introduced all of this to us. And so we did this great recording of podcasts with the students. And then Chey and myself, we were like, that was a lot of fun. That was really cool. Why don't you and I kind of dabble with this ourselves, just on the education side of things? And so that was where the Staff Room Podcast was born. That was when we started our podcast. It was called the Staff Room Podcast. We've now changed the name to the Chey and Pav Show to sort of reflect, to sort of align with the rest of our content. But yes, so we've been podcasting since August of 2019, and it has just been a complete roller coaster ride. So many great highs along the way, and it's led to so much more podcasting, and then again reciprocated back into the classroom as we are now teaching our students how to podcast, and we've taken that presentation with us to many different parts of North America as well. So that's sort of our beginnings with podcasting for ourselves and for the students.
Right, awesome. Yeah, it sounds like an incredible journey. Chey, how do you look back on it now?
Oh, when I look back on it, I think Pav, as always, hits all the important points. And there's really I'm just here to add a few anecdotal jokes to make it continue to flow.
Sounds good. Great.
When I think of this journey, I think, Pav, is that we've had this conversation on a podcast. It's about consuming, engaging, and then creating content. And then I originally thought, well, that's the end. You've created content. The Pav highlights there. Then it's going back into the cycle. But then you're going back into the cycle with a little bit more nuanced poignancy of what it is that you want to do. So we look back to that original student podcast and say they inspired us, and I would call the journey an emotional journey. You had that, it ignited that flame. But when we've come back around now to go along with sort of the passion and the excitement of a podcast, we have a lot more foundational knowledge to sort of anticipate where problems might arise, or to be able to try something a little bit more different or courageous in our podcasting journey. So when you think about going full circle, you're still on a growth. So you go through sort of that pattern. I'm consuming content, I'm engaging with content, I'm creating content. And then when you start again, when you're consuming content, you're looking for something different. So as a podcaster viewer to begin with, there's like, oh, I just want to be entertained. But now when I go back to a podcast, I'm listening for a few other things that make the listening journey that much more appreciative. So the cycle continues, but it's always rising in the continuum. And so when we look back to, we're doing student podcasts again, it's not just doing it again, it's doing it again with a lot more knowledge and wisdom and a lot more curiosity curiosity to drive it even further.
Yeah, and I can imagine it gives us a lot of perspective having your own experience hosting a podcast. When you introduce it to students and they kind of get their first taste of the podcasting world, I'd say it's definitely really helpful to understand exactly what they're experiencing when they're doing it inside the classroom. So that sounds awesome.
You know what I love about what you both said? And I was just thinking of this because I started doing podcasting with my students during the pandemic. So I had this ambitious goal in the fall of 2019 to do podcasting with my students in the spring of 2020, not knowing what was going to be coming our way. And my students were really the ones that said, no, we're still going to do this. But as you were talking about your experience and kind of how you've grown in that journey, I started thinking about design thinking, that design thinking process. And that was something that I worked really hard with my students on teaching them. You know, it's not going to be perfect the first time, and that's okay. We're going to continue to refine this process over and over. And that sounds exactly like what you guys are doing, but also what you're modeling for your students. So I really, really admire that. I think it's a huge, like you said, it's a risk to go out there and try to do something new. It's scary. My students were a little bit scared of doing that. But once they realized that it was okay, that it wasn't perfect, they really grew a lot. And so did I as well. So audio apps have just really, I've noticed in the last couple of years, especially in 2020, because we were all on lockdown, audio apps have rapidly been evolving. So Clubhouse, Twitter Spaces, I also saw LinkedIn and Facebook are going to have some aspect of that. So what do you believe contributes to the popularity of those audio spaces? And how do you believe that audio space might evolve or shape education in the future?
Oh, this question is deep. There's lots of places we can go with this. And I think of Pav's podcast experience. It also is a journey of self-actualization. And it's an understanding of what are the methodologies and pedagogies that are being reinforced through podcasting. And often when I'll come back to literacy, Pav and I have done a lot of disruption of our own literacy pedagogies where we realized we were trapped in a very colonial hierarchy of literacies. And our curriculum and our standards love writing and reading, but oral content isn't necessarily honored as much. It's a secondary thought. But then when you think about inclusive education, well, who is able to benefit when writing and reading are put at the top of this hierarchy, and who are erased, or whose experience and whose cultures aren't validated when we don't honor oral communication, audio content. And so Pav and I became very passionate about honoring audio content as an equal to reading and writing in our language programs. And we wanted to say we were not adding it as an add-on or as an extension. We realized Pav and I teach in a completely racialized community with very rich, diverse cultures. And we saw that reading and writing, of course, is still important. It's not to diminish it. It's to realize that our oral content storytellings are culturally ingrained for how communities have passed on knowledge and wisdoms. So that was really important to us as a foundation, is making sure in our curriculum and in our teachings, we had sort of a position. How did we position ourselves? This is about honoring oral communication and breaking down the hierarchy of literacy skills that tend to be ingrained in the system and in the curriculum. So when we often talk about anti-racist education, we look at the individual and then we give the system a pass, and not even willfully is sort of unacknowledged how the curriculum can facilitate this. So that's been part of our disruption. In regards to audio content, I'm glad you used the word audio content, because where does the podcast fit into that space? You're creating audio content. Where are you sharing it? We always would articulate that the podcast is something that you're sharing. And Pav and I, as an extension of our podcast, we always also do a live radio show. So there's a difference between a broadcast and a podcast and audio content. And how does that fit into the space? And what are you trying to do with that audio content? Is it a means to facilitate a student choice and voice and how they want to display their learning? So they're doing a math word problem. They want to explain it on a Flipgrid video or any sort of audio space to create content. You don't have to be video. You can just record it on your phone and submit it that way. Or is you're doing your podcast because maybe you're trying to make an instructional video and you want to have access to a greater audience, or you're making a school newsletter. You're trying to connect to community. Maybe you you have something bigger and you're trying to reach a more global community. So you're using your podcast to access that way. Perhaps you love the vibe of a live radio show, and so you want to go into the broadcast space. So audio content, I'm just glad we talked about audio content. And then we sort of figure out, what is my audio content? Where is it placed? What am I trying to do with it? And Pav, so please go fill in all the appropriate voids that I have left here in this rambling answer of audio content creation.
No, I don't think that there's any rambling involved here. I think you brilliantly highlighted the many different facets of audio content and what that can look like, and why it's so meaningful to students, and why is it so important for different learners to express their learning and their education. I'm just going to add a little bit when it comes to the professional development and educator side of things. I think that the importance of audio content and many of these spaces that you have highlighted comes from the efficiency that it offers. And I think that it's much, much easier to engage in audio content in terms of multitasking. And, we can be listening to this content while we are engaged in other tasks. While, if it's a visual, if it's like a Zoom webinar, that requires a different level of engagement. And so you have to be present and sitting in front of the camera, or you could be, doing other things, but you're still listening. And so I think that listening aspect has really taken off, because people really enjoy listening to content while they're at the gym, or out for a walk, or out for a run, or folding laundry, or doing things around the house. And so I think that accessibility side of things is what makes it so useful for educators when it comes to professional development. I think that will trickle down to students as well in the future. And so I think that that's also something very important to think about. And I think that's also why so many of these spaces have taken off so well, and everybody sort of wants to get in that area.
I love that. One of the things that I'm often talking about in regards to educators is, like you said, that multitasking. And so when I was in the classroom, I used Mote, and, people would ask me, why are you using Mote? And I said, well, the first thing is I can individualize this feedback. I can do it really quickly. And those students are hearing my voice. So it's as if I'm there with them, even if I recorded, while I was on a walk last night or whatever. I do think it really serves so many different learners. And I agree with you in all regards. I think it just trickles down. That's always been my thought. If the leaders are doing something, it's going to trickle down and the students are going to benefit. So speaking of student benefits, Michael, do you have a question?
Absolutely, yeah. And I want to just quickly jump back to a point Chey made on the previous question on the cultural importance of storytelling and honoring oral communication. I think that's something that I've never really been exposed to in the past, and I think sounds really, really interesting. And I know that there's the phrase you use, something else that I really like, is how to elevate and amplify student voice. So what is it directly that the students benefit from this process? What are the takeaways inside the classroom?
I think that the first and foremost, the best part of what podcasting can offer, or creating oral content, or creating any sort of audio content in the classroom, is the differentiation side of things. I think that Chey, highlighted that so perfectly when he was talking about that the cultural aspect of, not every culture around the world has a written means of, disseminating information. Much of that is oral storytelling. And so that storytelling comes very natural to many, many different areas around the world. And we live in such diverse communities, and we teach in such diverse communities. That is certainly a way that we are honoring those different voices that are in our spaces. And so having that as an option really opens up many avenues for success for students. And so providing that differentiation in that regard. But then also when it comes to producing content, audio content, we're not just, it's not just about talking into a microphone. There are so many different aspects of creating podcasts, like the graphic design side of things and creating graphics to go along with the podcast. There's the audio and video editing, the post editing. So there are a lot of students that gravitate towards that side of production. And So, there are a lot of students interested in that side of things, but don't necessarily want to be sitting behind the microphone and speaking into the microphone. They're not crazy about, having that kind of attention, but really are very interested in learning how to use all of the editing software and all of the different ways that they can elevate themselves or elevate their own abilities through this content creation. So it's that has really opened up a lot of doors. And as Chey and I have been doing this with our students, we've really seen that side of things shine for them when it comes to creating different parts. I don't really love sitting behind a microphone, but I really love the post-production. I really love, sharing on social media and learning how to embed all of this on the website. And so there are so many different avenues that students can get involved in. And I think that sort of voice and choice that we are able to offer students with a project like this in the classroom has really helped for students to tap into different strengths that they may have. So,
yeah, no, I really like that.
I'd add on just a little bit to the oral communication. Pav, a lot of our learning on this on Indigenous cultures has been through Kalinda Klein, and she runs a great podcast called the Anti-Racist Educator Book Clubs. And she talked extensively about Indigenous knowledge and wisdoms being passed through oral storytelling, group storytelling. And then she talked a little bit about the eradication of erasurism of culture through the dissemination of language, not allowing language to be taught or embedded in culture. And language, of course, is powerful speaking and sharing of stories. And so we really disrupted ourselves to learn a lot from listening to other people's audio content, to realize how important it was to honor oral storytelling and to realize whose stories, whose cultures are being erased by making everything format into a written and writing and reading format. So, Pat, just to add on to those great things you talked about all the different ways you can engage in sort of that audio content creation, is some of that learning regarding oral communication is it's been our learning that we've been lucky enough to share through our podcast experience.
I love how you said that it disrupted your pedagogy. I have a very similar story in my own classroom where I had been teaching for 17 years, and suddenly my entire thought process of how that learning environment is supposed to look was completely disrupted. And I love that everything that you're saying really speaks to the fact that you are preparing your students for their future and not ours. And that's something that I talk a lot about. I talk a lot about student empowerment, student voice and choice, and student leadership. And you guys are really doing this in your classroom, giving your students that space. So when I talk about preparing students for their future and not ours, besides student-led and created podcasts, what else do you believe educators might explore in learning spaces to prepare students?
I think it's about having sound methodologies and pedagogies. And I'll make a sort of a story and see how it connects. When we talk about math or science, say, sometimes we just dive right into the curriculum, right into the formulas. But when we talk about social emotional learning, it's not just how you greet your students at the door. It's how do you alleviate stresses within the content? And the greatest way to be socially, emotionally informed is to disrupt your content so that it does this. And one of the ways Pav and I have really fixated on this is how we go to embed storytelling in every subject. So often as a language teacher, you're sort of gifted a very easy opportunity to diversify your text or use oral communication. But if you're only using it in that compartmentalized space, then students only associate it with that subject or in that content. But you're trying to associate, say, oral communication or storytelling or immersing in stories throughout everything. So we've really worked to make sure that we're embedding stories, no matter what we're working on, whether it's history, whether it's geography, whether it's health and physical education. There's a story, there's a read aloud, there's something to connect on a bigger scale. And what that does is we try to humanize everything. So math isn't about a formula, it's an emotional journey. And so when you think about that big learning for students, how do you make them appreciate that everything is part of becoming human or recognizing who you are? We often talk about self-actualization, but it's very tough to actually learn who you are. You really have to dedicate a lot of time and immerse yourself in a lot of content. So on this idea of how are we preparing students for the future, we always embrace the emotionality, the humanistic side of everything. Look for stories, hear people's personal experiences going through things. When you think about methodology, yeah, you have student choice and you have inquiry and you have questioning. And when you talk about disruption per se, disruption is a pedagogy. So how am I being a disruptor all the time? Not because just in some singular subject, I say it's time to disrupt this. Actually, this should be a mindset. So we're curating mindsets of curiosity and disruption. And I would connect disruption to social justice, but I would connect disruption to questioning. When you hear something, do you question? And does your question lead to you going to try to find the answers? Because just because you question doesn't necessarily mean you're engaged in your thinking. We know our students, sometimes the question is a means to get away from diving into the content, but are you willing to question and then explore yourself and then collectively explore together? So in regards to how do you teach for the future, I think we want to teach a certain amount of mindset, but we always want to be checking in with our students, because I'll go on another little tangent. Pav, you can point at your watch at any time. As you know, we often talk as teachers, well, the teachers don't need to know everything. You don't need to be the leader. You can defer to your students. Let them lead the way. Let them lead the way. And as much as I believe that, and I want to believe that, is that what our students are thinking and feeling? Because you always got to recheck with our students. I think sometimes we think with our best intentions, we often, not that we willfully don't want to ask for student voice, I think we know student voice, and we don't check in with it as often as we need to. And so on a conversation I had with my class about content delivery, and I would say, how do you want me to teach this? Do you want me to front end this? Do you want me to teach with an example? Do you want me just to share a story? So you give them different access points. And one theme that always came back is, for students' level of comfort is the teacher to have a certain level of mastery. And so that whether you're directly teaching it or not, they're comfortable that you can direct that content. And that doesn't mean the pressure is on the teacher to know absolutely everything, but you also just can't let students sort of go off on their own, assuming that they'll totally guide their learning if they don't feel there's sort of a comfortable space. I don't want to say safe space, a brave space, in order to say they want to dive into learning, but they know to the core the teacher is there with a little bit of mastery of their content. And I think a lot of time when you sort of try to understand education through social media bites, you get this idea that the students take the lead, and the teacher sort of sits back. But you can sit back, but you got to facilitate that space. And there has to be a safety blanket of students knowing that I can come to the teacher when I need the teacher. But also you got to check that every single day. I made that comment about safe space. Whether a space is safe, I would probably argue you're never in a position as a teacher to affirm any space is safe. They're brave spaces. But who's feeling unsafe in any particular moment can always shift based on the content, based on the social dynamic. And so this plays into that classroom culture of mindset and pedagogies, and always checking in with your students. So what do they need for the future? They need you to be tapping into them. You need to be checking in with them and trying to create methodologies and way of sort of going through content and including stories and humanizing everything. And if the three of you can decipher 3 key points out of that, please give it back to me so I'll know what I said.
That was incredible. Everything you said was incredible. I love how you said, embrace the human side of everything. I was thinking in a math classroom when I was growing up, which I won't tell you the year that I graduated high school, but there was a level of shame in my math class because I would go in and feel like I didn't know anything. And the teacher definitely did not make me feel like I was in a brave space. I sat in the back of the classroom and barely passed that class, but it's because I believe we weren't back then thinking about the human side of everything, right? And creating this brave space. And I didn't think it was okay for me to say that I needed help because there was an expectation that this is so weird to me. I expected as a student that I should already know everything when I walked into the classroom. And the truth is, why am I there? It's to learn, but I didn't feel safe in learning. And so I love that you said the human side of everything, because I've never thought of it that way. It needs to happen in every class, storytelling, brave spaces, not just in an ELA classroom, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. And just to touch on a little bit of what Chey was talking about earlier, when it comes to content creation, but also the quality of the content consumption that we're teaching students as well. So that is definitely something that we need to be preparing students for, as well as they really get into more of this storytelling and more of the content creation in so many different areas. So, how does that improve the quality of the consumption because we can't all just be creating and not consuming any content. And so, talking about just to piggyback on what Chey was talking about as well, just we need to be working with students to make sure that they're understanding the content that other people are creating as well and appreciating it on a little bit of a different level.
Yes. So good. Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the three takeaways that bear on my mind is certainly the element of inclusivity within the classroom, and I think that's from my education experience when I was in school, and I went to school in a small town in the south of Ireland, so perhaps is very different to the experiences everyone else here, and a lot of our listeners will have had. I think inclusivity and that element of community. And then the third point being the brave space is a brand new concept for me. But I think if that was applied to the culture of the classroom and also applied to the mindset and approach of the education and of the students learning, I think my education experience would have been totally transformed and would have been totally different. And I think just the general takeaway from the conversation that we're having is the importance of storytelling, which is a concept I think I'd always have engaged with because I've always liked writing stories and engaging with film. That's kind of like how I learn. That's how I engage with people. It's kind of understanding their story. So I think if that was more prominent in my classroom, it would have really changed my attitude to learning and changed my relationship with education generally. So I think that's really powerful. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners will really understand and engage with that in a way that perhaps they haven't experienced in the past. On the topic of storytelling, and I'm going to do a bit of a rogue segue here, and I think we've had great timing for recording this podcast because the magnificent microphone is your new picture book. I would love to learn a little bit more about that. What are the key themes? What age group is it most applicable for? If I go to you, Pav, and to learn a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. Yes. The Magnificent Microphone is our picture book. It was just released 2 days ago. So it is available now. And many of the themes that we have talked about today in this conversation are strong themes in the book itself. So it centers around two characters, young Chey and young Pav, who, tell this sort of origin story about how they got into their own, podcasting journey or audio content journey. It's not quite clear yet where it's going to lead, but they discover this microphone that helps to elevate their voices. And so there's definitely the theme of inclusion, this theme of technology, of community, of voice and choice, and of differentiation, and of being part of these brave spaces where students are able to speak up and speak their minds, and be able to do so and feel good and confident about the content that they are delivering or the things that they want to say. So that definitely is something that comes through, and it mirrors a lot of our journey as podcasters, Chey and myself. We have often spoken about being just two teachers, and we don't mean that in a deficit sort of way. We mean that as this is who we are. This is what we have, explicitly done in our careers. We have been just two teachers, and it doesn't elevate us. It doesn't make us any better than any other teachers. We go through the same experiences that everybody else does, and we love to be able to highlight so many of the amazing things that we have experienced as teachers, but also many of the challenges as well. And so if our relatively small voices can be elevated through this journey that we have been embarking on for the past 2 years, then anybody's journey can also be the same. And so it is very much a story that is being told about us as much as it is for these two, pseudo fictional characters in the storybook. And it really is a great way to introduce storytelling, audio content into the classroom, and podcasting, if that's the route that students want to take, in order to elevate their voices, and how that can be done in the classroom setting or just on a personal side as well.
Yeah, and I think for all of our listeners that are looking to jump into the topic more and bring the topics that we've discussed today into their classroom, this book is a really great place to start. As you say, where can people buy it?
So the book is available on Amazon, and it is also available through Codebreaker, who is the publisher of the book. So codebreakeredu.com/books. And so all of their amazing books are available there, as well as ours, and amazon.com.ca.co.uk, all over the place. We know of some people who have purchased it in Australia already. So it is available everywhere on Amazon.
That's so exciting. I'm going to go buy my copy right after this, just so you know. Well, that leads us to my favorite part. I mean, this whole podcast has honestly been one of the best podcasts I've ever done. You guys are incredible. I am fangirling over everything that you do, your work, your passions, how you come across. I think our community is really going to benefit from everything that you've shared today. But this is my rapid fire question segment that I do with everybody. So Michael and I have pre-talked about what we're going to ask you, but in true rapid fire form, you can't take a ton of time to think through this. It has to be like whatever comes to your mind right away. So Michael's going to start us off with the first question.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'll jump straight in here. Finish this sentence. Technology is blank.
Fun.
Challenging.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Great. So my question is, you only get one meal for the rest of your life. What do you choose?
Protein shakes.
I thought you were going to go with.
Why are we laughing about that?
I thought you were going to go with pre-workout.
The good, very good.
I'm probably going to go with pizza, because I can change up pizza in so many different ways.
It's so funny. You don't know this. You did not know this prior to this, but Michael and I talk about pizza every week. Every week we talk about pizza during our weekly meetings, and usually every week Michael and I go for pizza separately because it's a great go-to. Okay, Michael, next question.
Sure. So most rewarding thing about writing this book?
Self-actualization, knowing more about myself.
That was going to be my answer too, but I would say
I saw you going to say that. I saw you were going to say that, so I got to get this first. I got to lay claim to this.
I'm going to say learning about the behind the scenes process, because that's something that I had no idea what goes into, publishing a book. So that has been really like a huge learning curve for myself, and so rewarding.
Absolutely. Now for the super serious question that I have. What is the picture on your phone lock screen or wallpaper right now?
Mine is my kids. So wait, let me see. Pull it up.
That's nice.
So me and my kids.
I guess I can show mine, but the problem is mine's only two of my kids, and my third daughter, she'll say, "Why am I on that?" I say, it's such an old photo. It's so cute. I couldn't take myself to take it down. So sorry, Esme, you're not on that one. But Devin Riley, you made the cut.
That's awesome.
We've really landed you in it there, Chey. Sorry about that. Another very serious question. If you had to just watch one TV show or movie every day for the rest of your life, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's so many great movies out there, shows. I'm going to have to say, just because I love this show so much, it's such a happy show, and I can't wait for the next season of it, but I'm going to say Ted Lasso.
I knew it.
Great.
I'm going to go with Sherlock, because he often describes himself as a high-functioning psychopath, I think, or sociopath, and I've taken that line and called myself a high-functioning introvert. So I'm going with that one, Sherlock.
That's cool.
That is great. A high-functioning introvert. I think I'm the same way. I'm going to start using that. And Ted Lasso, I told Michael before this, I think I would have chose Ted Lasso, but it changes for me pretty often.
Yeah.
So this last question, what never fails to make you laugh?
Chey. I find Chey hilarious, and he doesn't even have to do anything, and I start laughing.
Pav and I have had this conversation, because I say I often feel really bad about myself is I just don't find people or things that funny. And sometimes I feel bad when Pav tells me a joke and I don't laugh, and I go, sorry, Pav, I really wish I found you funny, but it's my own problem. I don't find a lot of humor in everything around me. So I actually just take that as my own issue.
And that makes me laugh so much.
That is funny. I see why he makes you laugh now. So to wrap things up, can you please tell our listeners and our audience where we can find you?
Yes, absolutely. So cheyandpav.com is sort of our home base for everything, but we are on all social media. You can find us on Twitter. It's at Staff Podcast. And then myself and Chey are also very active with our individual handles on Twitter. We're on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. We're all over the place, and we're very accessible too. I want to add that we love to chat with people. So please send us a DM, please send us a message, send us an email, info@cheyandpav.com. We'd love to hear from everybody.
I love it. Do you have any last words that you want to share before we stop recording today?
Chey, anything to add?
Well, nothing of importance, but something of, like academic importance. Like I just max myself out on my academic capacities, but I certainly want to say thank you for gifting Pav and I a chance to chat with both of you and have these great questions and to share in the journey. Because every time you talk with folks and you share your story, you learn a little bit more about yourself, and then you're gifted a chance to learn a little bit more about both of you. So thank you for gifting us time to connect with you personally and connect with your audience. And we hope that more collaborations and more chances to connect manifest from this. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes, I want to just reiterate what Chey said. Thank you so much. This has been a really fun conversation and a real opportunity for us to chat and chat a little bit more about some of the things that we're up to as well. So thank you again for having us.
Absolutely. What a pleasure it was to hear from you. And yes, I hope I get to meet you soon. I'm going to start manifesting that because I really want to meet you in person. Michael, thank you so much for co-hosting with me today. It's always a pleasure. Michael also makes me laugh hysterically, and he doesn't really find a lot that I say funny either, which makes me laugh. But we are so thankful for both of you just taking time out of your day to meet with us and share with us and tell your story. And make sure all of you listening and watching that you also go follow all of their social media accounts, connect with them, DM them, go to Amazon, find their book, support them in that way. And also make sure that you check out the Wakelet podcast. You can go to www.wakelet.com/@the-Wakelet-podcast to see all the different podcasts that we've done. All of our team is hosting different series, so you can go back and listen to those on Spotify or iTunes or YouTube, whatever works for you. Also, we're on all the social media channels at Wakelet: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I think I have listed everything. Michael, have I forgotten any?
I think you're good. I think that's a lot of them.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next time. Have a great day.
Thanks so much.